Hi everyone and welcome to the May 2025 Microsoft product licensing update from the Software Asset Management practice here, version 1. Hey Neve, hey William, how are you today?
Very well,
Hey,
thank you.
Carl.
Good. So a few updates this month, also some interesting updates on CSP licensing and some updates or refreshes of some of the license briefs within the Microsoft space this month. So Neve, first up, do you want to have a look at the product terms, what you saw, what piqued your
Yeah,
interest?
well, what caught my eye was the Microsoft Dragon Copilot, which is a new product that's added to the product terms. And also, there's been some clauses introduced on healthcare intended use and healthcare required authorizations. So that gives you an idea that it's a co-pilot for the healthcare industry essentially. So anybody kind of in that space can actually go to, there's a Dragon Copilot licensing guide that was published this month as well. And essentially what it is it's actually quite an interesting product, in that it's essentially automating tasks for clinicians and healthcare kind of physicians in that industry in terms of patient management. So some of the things that kind of caught my eye were like where they can use voice recognition to dictate, edit and navigate like medical notes. So effectively kind of making the whole process of managing clinical documentation and records management and capture and so on much more kind of streamlined. So look at some of the terms then really it you can imagine the sensitivity and the nature of that kind of information and data. So those clauses that the product terms refer to are to do with obviously, making sure that the customer, the healthcare customer is aware of, any disclaimers and, and consent to their data being submitted to Dragon Copilot. And also then, yeah, that it's only used by, people who are kind of qualified users, members of an individual's care team, medical staff and so on. So it's quite interesting really what this stuff can do, and I guess, in terms of how it kind of supports like the healthcare industry. So and then actually just in terms of, I had a look at the licensing guide. It's either in a per user, so it can be purchased under, MCA's CSP or enterprise program, and it can be done through either a per user license where you get all the features, or there's also a per user Dragon Copilot Flex, which is a blend of per user and pay as you go for ambient and generative AI, which is then linked to like an Azure subscription. So interesting that, in terms of how Microsoft is kind of provisioning the ways that you can purchase. I suppose it's maybe indicative of how things are going really, as far as the product is licensed. So that's really the main one that I thought was very interesting to kind of get to know over the course of this month's product terms.
Very good. So I looked at a slightly less interesting topic. So this month, Microsoft added remote network bandwidth to the availability and prerequisite tables. So if you're handling remote connectivity, this will interest you, and this is an area that I'm not that familiar with. So, what is it? So, basically, this is focused on the amount of network capacity reserved for secure remote connections. So, think of things like branch offices or remote users that are connecting through IPsec tunnels. So, um, remote network bandwidth is now available as a license add-on. Um, for Microsoft Intranet, or sorry, Entra Internet Access. Your base bandwidth depends typically on how many qualifying licenses you've got for Entra IDP1, Entra Internet Access, or Entra Suite. So now, if you need more bandwidth, you can buy it, and it usually comes in chunks of 500 megabytes per second, I think it is. And then you can assign it to specific tunnels in segments of 250, 500, 750, and 1000 megabytes per second step. So definitely provides you with a much more flexible approach to how you conduct your network planning. One important heads up on this one is that you need at least 50 combined licenses for those Entra products. So there is a licensing prerequisite there, but I think that would affect a very small minority of users. But generally speaking, most customers should be able to dive into this one and start to avail of those add-ons. So to break it down, if you're looking to scale remote work or managing branch connectivity, then this is going to be a really great way for you to boost secure access and keep things running that more smoothly, I guess you could say. So William, over to you. Anything on the terms that piqued your interest?
Well, just a couple of general housekeeping ones, really. So the first one's quite strange. So Microsoft have added in, and this is their words, hidden offer products to the MCA availability tables without actually explaining what hidden means. And more bizarrely, they've named the products that are included, so they're not hidden. So it's the Microsoft 365 cross-tenant user data migration SKU. So that's sort of when you want to combine two tenants together and transfer, exchange online SharePoint data and all that sort of good stuff. Also the Defender vulnerability management add-on to Defender for endpoint servers. Viva Glint VDA add-on for M365 E3 and E5. The M365 apps for enterprise and workspace analytics. So yeah, I can't say what hidden means. But I suppose it's just bring them into line with all the other products on the MCA availability tables. So it's a bit of a strange one, but hopefully that will come out in the wash over the next few months. And there's some more housekeeping. So universal license terms for online services. So the updates to generative AI services, use of content for training, language for clarity. They've bizarrely made a strange statement about making it clearer for how you can use language for training within Gen AI services. And the other one is update to customer copyright commitment to basically clarifies when a customer's obligations to defend Microsoft against third-party intellectual property claims under a customer's volume license agreement will not apply. So yeah, I don't know if they translated that from German by putting the verb at the end, but yes, so it's just more stuff on what you can do, when you can do it, and what you shouldn't be doing on when you shouldn't be doing it.
Great stuff.
A very clear and concise message.
Yeah.
Sounds like a puzzle.
Yes.
So this month, Niamh, you had a quick look at. I know there was some license briefs that have been updated. I had a look at the downgrade rights brief, and I think you looked at the qualified user device brief as well. I think both briefs historically in the on-premise world had a major impact in terms of how you calculate a license position, and were responsible for a lot of what I might describe as hidden risks of license compliance historically. So do you want to quickly run through the qualified user device brief and see if there's anything interesting in that one?
Well, I suppose the first thing is, because this is 2025, I was keen to see was there anything new that was in this brief, and for the purposes of the definitions of qualified devices and qualified users, and I think industry devices as well, are all, and it's stated they're taken exactly as they are under the standard EA enrollment contract from last published in 2023. So nothing new there, and it reads exactly as you kind of would expect, and I guess one of the things is that it did kind of look at the current definition under the product terms for what is or isn't constitutes a managed device. So I guess from so nothing new here, but I guess the importance really is, particularly if you've got an enterprise-wide contract like an enterprise agreement, and you're either kind of midway through or coming into maybe your final year, is to look at like these definitions, because likely they're the same as what they were going into your current contract, but again, where are you today in terms of kind of compliance with those Microsoft terms? I suppose the cost efficiency of, what is, a qualified device or qualified users, and how you have that kind of, if there's any kind of split in those, but also as well, what isn't, a qualified user, which I thought that the document could have benefited from, maybe at least linking to the likes of kind of frontline workers and those definitions and licensing rights, and also external users, because we know that actually that was updated kind of in the past year or so. So yeah, really, it's still important to kind of bring it to the mind's eye, particularly if you are, renewing into another kind of enterprise contract, or even kind of if it's an MCA or CSP, because as I think we were saying before, that audit rights are probably even more solidified, in terms of the existing agreement types or license types that Microsoft have today.
Yeah, I think it's it's often misinterpreted, or it's, historically that qualified user definition has been somewhat ambiguous, and particularly for organizations that have a high quantity of contract staff or external users and so on, that sometimes it can be misunderstood, and that can have positive and negative consequences. But in some cases you have customers who are being possibly overly cautious and calculating users in a qualified device count that should have been excluded from the agreement. And then you also have situations where some organizations don't fully understand when a user should be counted within the agreement. And then you've got like that piece in the middle, right, where some organizations, there's such a high degree of ambiguity around it that the definitions struggle to align with that specific user's requirement. And I suppose that's where during contract negotiations, really important to look to work with the Microsoft account team and look to include clarification amendments or amendments to ensure that you're protecting yourselves against having to include those users at a later date potentially. So often overlooked, often misunderstood, and really important one at the same time to keep a handle on. I had a look at downgrade rights. So this was historically I suppose you could probably call it a golden oldie of license compliance risk. So historically, organizations in the on-premise world, depending on how they've purchased Microsoft technology through, a variety, if they've used a variety of different licensing programs like OEM, fully packaged product, or volume licensing, the types of downgrade rights that are associated with Microsoft technologies through those different licensing programs differ. And so sometimes that's misunderstood by many organizations. So the licensing brief has been recently updated. I couldn't see anything massively new in there, but still a really important brief to familiarize yourselves. I would say though, as time's gone by and many organizations have reduced, particularly around Microsoft Office Suite, their usage of traditional perpetual licenses for Microsoft Office, given the transition to Office 365 and Office 365. Some of the major risks that we would see associated with downgrade rights have been somewhat deprecated, but having said that, they still exist. And, depending on how you purchase your software, you may be impacted by some of these risks. And in many cases, the risks will fly under the radar. So certain things to kind of think about, based on my rereading of this, one big one that many organizations fail to understand is when you're downgrading Microsoft software, the downgrade rights, they may give you certain downgrade rights to previous versions of a product, but you need to be mindful of the additions that you're installing. So for example, if you're buying the latest version of Office Standard, but you're downgrading it to a previous version of Office Professional Plus, which could be easily done, then you're in breach of the terms. If you're purchasing through OEM, some of the operating systems will have limitations in terms of how far back you can go relative to the version that you're licensed for. Other things to be mindful of: if you're downgrading to a legacy version of a product and that product is licensed on a server CAL basis, you need to be careful of the CAL mismatch that might be there. So that one might be particularly relevant to, say, SQL Server, for example, where some organizations might assume they have the right number of CALs, but because of a mixed environment of different versions and editions of SQL Server, all of a sudden you might fall out of sync with the number of CAL licenses that you might need if you haven't gone down the per processor route, should I say. That could also apply to things like external connectors as well. So if you're downgrading to previous versions of external connectors, there might be a disconnect between the rights that you might have associated with those external connectors. I'm trying to think, is there anything else in there that was relevant?
You'd wonder how relevant this is going to be anyway, as Microsoft kind of force customers into the modern lifecycle policy for things like Exchange. SharePoint's already gone that way. And so Exchange is going to subscription editions. It's moving out of the traditional perpetual major version release cycle. So it's interesting that they publish this, I suppose, for maybe customers that aren't ready to move to the modern lifecycle policy, do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So the subscriptions really kind of throw an element of complexity in there. Now there's some great supporting documentation around this, so you can understand what downgrade rights apply to specific products within the product terms themselves. But again, yeah, it's just, if you are going to start to avail of downgrade rights, then it's worth having a look back to ensure that you've got, the right strategy in play. Because, probably talked about some of the more negative consequences or the risks associated with downgrading. But, in certain cases, there are flexibilities there that you might not necessarily be aware of, particularly with additions. So in some cases, some organizations might need extra SQL Server standard licenses, but they've got old enterprise licenses that they could downgrade, and they might assume they can't move between the editions there, and that one does give you flexibilities. So, it's definitely, if you're utilizing downgrade rights, it's worthwhile understanding how those downgrade rights apply and what's the impact of downgrading relative to the type of license that you've purchased as well. So again, very much in the on-premise world here, but worth refreshing if it does apply to your organization. So that was the downgrade rights brief. William, finish things up. Some recent announcements on CSP. This one is kind of exciting, right? So there's some changes afoot in terms of how Microsoft will allow organizations licensed through MCA. We've extensively covered the transition for many customers experience away from an enterprise agreement over the coming months and years. So I'll hand over to you, William. Maybe if you want to go through some of those updates on CSP, it'd be useful.
Yeah, so it's I suppose it's Microsoft's change of plan from not allowing certain customers, smaller enterprise customers, to renew or even buy into an enterprise agreement from scratch, and put them through either the MCA-E, which is direct with Microsoft, or MCA Breadth, which is CSP, traditional CSP, which is through resellers such as ourselves. So that's really thrown a cat amongst pigeons, because what do customers do? Well, there is now a back-end process within the Partner Center, Microsoft Partner Center. So providers such as Version 1 can see when customers' enterprise agreements are coming up for renewal, if the customer permits them, and it's a click button transfer process. That can be done either mid-term, so you don't have to wait till the end of that customer's enterprise agreement, or at the end of that term, the billing essentially and the licenses transfer across to the provider of their choice. And what Microsoft's done to try and help align traditional enterprise agreements sort of formalities and structure is bring in a new 3-year term for Microsoft 365 E3 and also E5 at this stage. There's no other products announced to go on that 3-year cycle as yet, but that means a price lock-in. So customers no longer have that sort of unknown uncertainty of monthly, or if it's monthly subscription or an annual subscription, that prices are going to go up imminently. So they have a 3-year lock-in, but they have to pay for it all up front or annually in 3 equal amounts over the term of 3 years. So, and there's no decrease in numbers of licenses. There's no true down or available at the end of each year, but it does give that price lock-in. So if you think, interest rates, prices are linked to every 6 months to price harmonization to the exchange rates. So potentially that could protect customers, or it could also mean that you lose out because prices could actually come down in that time. But it's risk averse way of doing it. The transfer process is interesting as well. So that means, yeah, literally the users and the accounts, the licenses all come across at the same time without having to manually reapply. And the other interesting final bit on that is Microsoft took Teams out of any new licenses for M365 E3 and E5 to comply with EU regulations, but they also introduced that into the UK as well to align. So it meant that you have to buy Teams separately. They are actually allowing the renewal into CSP from EA to include Teams as an option. So it's with or without Teams, which is quite an interesting one, because that's, whilst they said they were complying with EU regulations, it wasn't actually an EU law that said they had to decouple. It was Microsoft prompting the competition's regulations from EU. So they never had to take Teams out of Microsoft 365, but they sort of preempted it, and they seem to be bringing that back into play now. So it's quite all changes. It's all very new announcements and all very new processes, but it gives customers a bit of peace of mind that if they are having to exit an EA, then there is a viable option through MCAE, which is through Microsoft Direct, or as we would recommend, through CSP.
The customer gets to choose who the partner, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, it's not
No, it's not just a grab all. No, so we can only see, we have to become a part of record first.
Yeah.
Customers, which basically gives us their account. It basically brings their entity within the partner center. And then we can see that they've got an enterprise agreement renewal. So there has to be that formal engagement before that happens.
Yeah. So it's a step in the right direction. Where customers are being moved out of the enterprise agreement program. So I think it's positive. Hopefully over time it'll evolve and get more products in there.
Yeah.
But one of the core benefits of EA was obviously that 3-year price protection and the predictability. So at least that in part is back in play, which is good.
Yeah, definitely.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Great. So that was a long update, 42 minutes, I think. So thanks everybody.
That's great.
Useful insights, both old and new. So until next month's Microsoft product licensing update from version 1 software asset management practice. We'll see you then. If you have any questions, queries in the meantime on all things licensing, please feel free to reach out to us here, whether it's on Microsoft or any other third-party vendor products. We'd be delighted to help. Thanks, Niamh. Thanks, William.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, William. Thanks, everyone.